Wedding workers. What wedding was so bad that you knew they would divorce? Viewer edition.
Story 1. Here's a nice story of an old college friend of mine whose wedding I attended last year. It's the end of September. We've already gone through the ceremony and are at the reception. The bride and groom looked stunning. Unintentional side note, because I love gushing about this, they had a wonderful wedding with slight Star Wars / Legend of Zelda themes powdered here and there with handmade resin coasters, some of which their initials of their first name, others with either the Triforce or the Rebellion symbols on them. Bride is a big fan of Star Wars and groom loves the Legend of Zelda franchise. Also, each member of the wedding party, from bridesmaids and groomsmen to ring bearer and flower girl, had a little Star Wars Lego character tied to bouquets or boutonnieres. It was awesome. Sorry, I loved how my friend and her hubby flaunted their nerdiness without going overboard and still looking classy. Now back to the story. We're halfway through the reception, meals were served, speeches were made, and mother of the groom, Mog groom, and fob bride dances were danced. Both were absolutely sweet, and I could tell mother of the groom and father of the bride were so proud. It's cake cutting time. The bride and groom are at the cake table, and I'm trying my best to get a snapshot of them cutting the cake. And then it happens. Some dude, I think it was a groomsman, yells from behind them, "Shove the cake into her face!" I winced at that because I listened to Bridezilla or Marriage Isn't Gonna Last Long, even to put me to sleep. Shoving cake into a bride or groom's face was a sign of a red flag. I was really hoping he was joking. Gosh darn, hubby, who is a very, very, very smart dude, shouted in unison with his wife the word no. I had a mental fist bump in the air at his response. I've seen videos of grooms smashing cake into the bride's face, even vice versa. Why do people think it's funny destroying probably an hour's worth of makeup or a very nice rented tux with frosting? And deep down, cake smashing your significant other when they say no shows how much you respect them. Very proud of the groom for shutting that down, even if it was a joke. Long story short, dude is egging the groom to cake smash, groom says hell no, and right now is happily past the 6-month mark of being married to my friend. To my friend and her hubby, I'm wishing you two a long and happy marriage. Yeah, I actually think the cake smashing in the face, it can be cute and funny. Like, I've seen folks do it, and it's a really fun, charming moment, especially getting it caught on camera, if they're both down for it. Like, that should maybe even be discussed ahead of time, because yeah, some brides spend a long time getting like their makeup and hair done right and everything, and they want to like keep the dress in good condition and stuff. And if you're not careful with that, you can ruin it. And some of these weddings are expensive. Makeup costs a lot, and it's gonna cost you a lot more if you ruin it.
Story 2. Concerning the 26-minute 35-second mark of the original video, I have a story that backs up this theory. So my aunt, not related, but one of my dad's old coworkers, had an anime-themed wedding. Lots of Sailor Moon because I think that was her favorite one. She likes Kirby and Pokemon as well, but you can only go so far with those. My dad told me to help shoot some photos, but one woman, I don't know who, but I assume was just a cranky wedding planner, wouldn't even let me into the bride's room while they were getting ready. I did get to take pictures of the groom and his friends kind of goofing off, so that was relaxing for me. I've gotten better, but I can be very nervous and quiet when meeting people for the first time. Getting a "no, we already have pictures" and a door almost to the face stressed me out a bit, especially since my dad had specifically told me to get pictures of them preparing. A third to half the guests were dressed as anime characters, me included. I was a bit scared at first, since when we arrived, most of the people were dressed like you typically see at a wedding, but some people did show up as anime characters, and my aunt seemed extremely happy to see anyone even referencing anime. We've got a book of their wedding photos sitting on the mantle, the cover being her and her husband dressed as Tuxedo Mask, sharing their first kiss as a married couple. We usually get together for Pokemon Go events, but they always look really happy together, whether at their home, ours, or out and about. I've got a really good feeling about them.
Hey folks, quick content warning for this next story. It does have some references and whatnot to self-termination. And so if you are uncomfortable with that, you may want to skip to the time code on screen to avoid this story.
Story 3. Concerning Story 7 and 22 from the original video, remind me of a girl I knew in college who couldn't make any relationship when she was at work. If you ever asked her why she broke up with any of her boyfriends, she would always say that they were jerks to her or they tried to R her. If you asked her exes, on the other hand, they would say that she mentally and sometimes physically abused them over the smallest things. I think her longest was about a month. One day, I got one of those parents of bride and parents of groom inviting you to the wedding of bride and groom letters and saw her name on the letter. This is like 7 or 8 years out of college. I also knew the groom as my high school science partner. No way he was going to recognize me. Out of curiosity, I went. I walked inside of the church where everyone except the kids had a look on their faces like they were being held hostage instead of at a wedding. The ceremony began, and as the bride walked down the aisle, the groom had a face like Luigi in the beta game over screen from Luigi's Mansion, all gloomy and depressed. At the reception, the groom told his best man that he would be going back to the hotel to get some more food. The manager of the hotel called the groom's parents shortly after and said he had committed self-termination by tying a chain link to both himself and a cement block, went to the hotel pool, and drowned himself. His funeral was 2 weeks later. While I was there, I saw the bride, clearly fake crying, clenched my fist, walked up to her and socked her in the face while yelling, "You know what you did, you rotten W," as people held back. I somehow wasn't charged, but the bride was charged with domestic abuse and enforced self-termination. The domestic abuse I knew without a shadow of a doubt, but I would have never guessed enforced self-termination. She was sentenced to 11 years.
Hey folks, quick content warning. Unfortunately, this story does have mention to child abuse and even R. And so if you are uncomfortable with that, you might want to skip to the times code on screen to pass this story up.
Story 4. I photographed a wedding where I thought that the groom was looking at all of the younger women like they were meat in a butcher shop. I thought that there was no way the marriage would last. I was right. 6 months later, I read an article in the newspaper about the groom being arrested for drugging and brutally R-ing the bride's 12-year-old daughter one night while the bride was at work. The bride was a nurse working nights in a hospital emergency room. Imagine the wife's shock when the ambulance brought her daughter into the hospital for treatment. The girl needed 2 surgeries to save her life, and as a result of her injuries, she will never be able to have children of her own. The groom is now serving life plus 65 years in prison, and he has already been transferred to another prison twice because the other inmates have almost beaten him to death. He's been placed in solitary confinement in his current prison just to keep the other inmates from ending him. Story 5. Obligatory not in the industry, but I do have a story that would fit in here. A friend of ours, let's call her A, suddenly got a "I must get married and have a baby because everyone around me is and I feel left out" thought in her head that wouldn't leave. So she married the first guy that was interested in her. His all-time crush, let's call her B, was at the wedding as a bridesmaid, and when she walked down the aisle during rehearsal, his eyes were all over B, visibly checking her out. When his fiancée walked down, his eyes barely followed her. Many people noticed and hoped that he wouldn't make that mistake the next day, and hopefully his best man would smack him for it. Sure enough, the big day comes and his eyes are undressing B. His wife walks down the aisle, and I think he looked at the dad more than A. A kid later, and I think that was still her last big day, and his was sometime before the wedding.
Folks, I know you start to get worried that you're, oh, I'm in my whatever 20s, 30s, and I haven't gotten married, and that feels, like people are judging me, and now I want to get married. That should not be the goal. Just getting married shouldn't be your goal because it can kind of skew your perspective a little bit. Not healthy. You should just want to be able to find someone to share your life with and only pursue marriage if you're truly happy with that person, because trying to force it and everything, you end up with stories like this.
Story 6. I got one. My younger brother and his ex-girlfriend broke up after about 2 years of being together. A few months later, she got engaged to another guy, and a few months after that, she's married. Her reason for marrying him was simple, that she wanted to be married, not necessarily to the guy she married. She was 19 at the time, would still contact my brother claiming to still love him, and came to work with me in our town for a few weeks before the wedding like she was trying to get him to do something or something. And then, over the summer, she calls my brother and goes on about how she was regretting her choices. Well, no crap, girl, you're 19. Super weird and kinda red flaggy. Story 7. Somewhat related to Story 12 from the original video. On the day of my younger sister's wedding, we, the bridesmaid family, without the bride being there, placed bets on how long the marriage will last. I don't remember what the bets are since we really didn't set up an actual pot, but my sister has been married to her husband since 2014 with 3 kids, and there are signs of a failing marriage. He would put himself before my sister and their kids, like spending money on attending his 50th rock concert that year over spending a penny for his daughter's dance classes, or not going to work and getting paid for several days because of an injury, and not see an actual doctor because he could just sleep it off. My mom once said my sister is just putting up with him just for the kids' sake. Story 8. Not in the wedding industry, but I did work in family law. Back when I was a legal assistant, we would get couples from time to time who wanted a prenuptial. This is where the couple agrees on beforehand what would be divided and how if the marriage ended in a divorce. Now don't get me wrong, there are legitimate reasons to get one of these. However, 99% of anybody who comes in for one looked like a couple that wouldn't last. We must have done 24 divorces at least for people who had prenups from us.
Prenups are such a weird thing because on one hand, I understand people wanting to protect themselves, divorce can happen and you never know. But at the same time, if you're marrying someone, boy, the first thing should be a foundation of trust, I trust this person enough to want to marry them and join us together. And a prenup just says not that much trust, but then again, you should protect yourselves. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. I am not married, and boy, this just makes me want to stay that way. Don't worry, Madam Fact and I actually very much don't want to actually be married. We're just partners. The government has no place with us.
Story 9. My uncle's wedding. Everything was fine for the most part, except the bride kept crabbing and moaning about little things. Throughout the year or so that passed, she has abused and manipulated him. About a month ago, we found out they're going for divorce, and it seems like she has had this planned for at least a bit. She got onto his phone and deleted photos from when they were with my parents and other aunt and uncle, both women are his sisters, where he had visible marks from her physically assaulting him before. Yes, she did go to recently deleted and deleted them from there. She's been an intensive butt to others for most of the time she's been with him, and during Christmas with most of the family, she seems to have beef with everyone there. Story 10. I knew this couple who kept breaking up every year, and after the girl's parents divorced, she decided she didn't believe in love anymore, and the guy goes to the ends of the earth to try and get her parents back together. They don't, but the girl and the guy do. The wedding was supposed to be in their house, but his older brother lied and got them the venue for a rich family at a super fancy hotel, and the bride and groom were arrested on their honeymoon night. As far as I know, they're still married with 2 kids, and I think their names were Corey and Topanga.
This groom just sounds like a total boy, and he's going to have to grow up because when he meets world, things are just going to go topsy-turvy for him,
Story 11. I knew a couple that got married and fought the whole day. I was not invited to the wedding, but knew folks that were. The bride was doing typical bridezilla type of stuff before the wedding, and the groom was just along for the ride in the least helpful ways. They got a wedding venue that had changed ownership after they had a contract. The new owners were not happy about having to honor it. They left their own reception to argue loudly in the parking lot. They left for their honeymoon the next day, and he came back 3 days early alone and disappeared for a few weeks. He apparently only returned because she somehow got him the message that she was pregnant. They did not have a baby and divorced about a year later. Story 12. I thought this about a wedding I went to 4 years ago. He turned up drunk, didn't want to be there, she kept yelling at him and the guests, he didn't want to kiss or even hug her, and everyone was scared of her as she treated us all extremely poorly. She also told us there'd be food for everyone, but there wasn't, so several of us couldn't eat anything there. When someone politely asked about the food, she screamed at them for being ungrateful. They're still together, but he's put his foot down and doesn't tolerate her crap anymore. Story 13. Not a wedding worker, but I was at a wedding. The bride had a thing about doing everything herself. She made a big deal about it being her wedding. Her part of the vows were me this and me that. She finished her vows by saying, if I have to go through this world and do everything for myself, at least I have someone who doesn't have dreams to interrupt my plans. They were divorced about 5 months later. Story 14. Most horrible wedding I worked at was, at first, no hard liquor and then 1 shot after dinner. Then sparsely, and then the groom let it flow. Shortly after midnight, I went for a smoke break in our beer garden. After a few minutes, the bride's father and the groom came outside arguing, and shortly after, the groom received a good hook to his face. Needless to say, the party was over. Story 15. My, thankfully, ex-husband disappeared after cutting the cake and spent almost our entire reception smoking weed in the woods with his friends. I spent so much time answering his family's questions about where he was, calming them down, and actively looking for him that I barely saw my own family and friends. Knew immediately I had made a huge mistake.
Look, I understand that weddings aren't, different people put different amounts of importance onto weddings. I personally don't find weddings to be hugely important, nor does my partner. But to some people, they're very important. But I'd say no matter what, if you're going to have a wedding, you need to treat the wedding at least as important as your partner is going to treat it. You have to respect them that much if you're going to get married to them, and not just ditch the wedding to get high in the woods, you mook.
Story 16. My friend's cousin canceled her own wedding because her boyfriend admitted he was a virgin, and that's why he wouldn't sleep with her before the wedding. What's funny is he ended up marrying my cousin, who was also waiting for marriage. Meanwhile, his ex is divorced and pays alimony to a drug dealer and child support to another man. Story 17. Guy kissing his mother. A guy I dated. At his birthday party, his mother's mouth kissed him in front of everyone else, and no one said anything. So, yeah, if the guy you date is doing this, he will always have his mommy as number 1, and never, ever you. Leave as soon as you can. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.